Right. So, if anybody else shows up, it's bring your own chair. Welcome to Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, chapter 35. And we'll be on page 386 in a moment. And this chapter is the first chapter of the section that we're calling the power of action. So for those of you that are new to the class, a couple of points. First of all, the book that we're doing, which is called the Tanya, at least you don't have one there, right? Yeah. Good?
Correct. I would like one.
Yeah. Sure. So can you share with Irit? Perfect. Okay. So the book that we're doing is called the Tanya. And the Tanya is a book that was written at the end of the 17th century. And it was written by the Alter Rebbe, who was the first Rebbe of Chabad, of Chabad Hasidus. And in it, he attempts to give you, I guess, the psychology of Judaism. So the psychology of the soul. And this is based on the Kabbalah, which is, I guess, loosely translated as Jewish mysticism. And as we have mentioned in our earlier lessons, all at the beginning, so for those of you that are not familiar, you can turn over to the beginning of the book, at least this version of the book that we have here, to this page. It doesn't have a number, but to this page. And you'll note that the Tanya is made up of 53 chapters. And in it, he goes through all sorts of, our functionality and our interactions with the world, etc., and how Judaism and the psychology of Judaism work and play at that psyche. And he touches on our emotions, and he touches on our interactions with other human beings, he touches on our relationship with God, he touches on prayer, he touches on meditation, all in the spirit of trying to better ourselves and become closer to God, or as we've begun to realize recently, to become one with God, right? To become unified and actually to become one with godliness. So we spent the bulk of the first half of the book speaking about our emotions, for lack of a better word. We spoke about our negative emotions, suffering, depression, anger, coping with different situations in our lives that may trigger certain emotions, and what the proper way for that is. Can negative, or at least what's labeled as negative emotions, can they ever be a catalyst for good, right? So can something like being bitter or depressed or down, can that ever be a catalyst for further growth and things like that? We touched on lots of these things throughout. And at chapter 35, or in these next three chapters, which would make up season 7 or session 7, with these three chapters, we're going to talk about the power of action, because it's high time, to be quite honest. You see, the Alter Rebbe opens his book, as those of you that were here at the first course, I think, right? I think there's a number of you here that were here at the first course. Well, remember, the Alter Rebbe opens the whole book up, even on the title page. The Alter Rebbe mentions the verse from Deuteronomy, which is part of Moses' last words to the Jewish people. Right? He says, in greater context, this is after he has said that the Torah is not far from you, and it's not distant, it's not up in the heavens that you should ask who will climb up to the heavens and get it for us. It's not over the sea that you will ask who will cross the seas and receive it for us. It's not in the distant, it's right here, it's very close to you. And he ends off that statement, that general sentiment, by saying, Ki karov elecha hadavar me'od, that this object, this concept, this thing called the Torah is very, very close to you. Ki karov elecha hadavar me'od, very, it is very close to you. Beficha, in your mouth, uvilvavcha, and in your heart, lasoto, to do it. And as we've learned over the first 34 chapters, much of what's being referred to there is the fact that every human being has three ways of interacting with the world. Right? We have our ficha, I'm going through the regular order, which is mind, mouth, and heart, right? Or mind, mouth, and action. But beficha bilvavcha means in your mouth, so that's the power of speech, right? Bilvavcha is in your heart, so that's our emotions, and la soto is our actions. And we've done a very good job up until today, at least I think so, in my humble opinion, of tackling our emotions, right? And the question is, what about our action, right? And so, of course, on a very simple level, the whole purpose of our emotions is for action, right? Meaning, it's very nice that we may do something for someone else, right? Then try to buy flowers for your spouse, and then just give it to them and say, here it is, like whatever, or anything that you do, and there's no emotion involved in it. Obviously, It's a lot harder, as the Alter Rebbe said, for it to fly up, right? So any action that we do for God, but it's not permeated with an emotion, is obviously a lot less valuable. But our emotions help us to better our character. They also help us to be better people, right? It's not just about the power, the emphasis that it places on the action. It's also about who we are as people, right? But we cannot forget about the action, which is paramount, right? Action is key. And that's what we're going to tackle today. So the power of a mitzvah. We're going to go very Kabbalistic. I'll attempt to bring it down from the... Meaning we're going to do a lot of quoting of the Zohar, and we're going to try to bring that down into practical application. So what does that mean for me? Why is my action so powerful? Okay, so a couple of opening questions. One of the things that's become clear over the first 34 chapters is that the Alter Rebbe is clearly avoiding and encouraging us to become a tzaddik. As a matter of fact, at a certain point in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe actually uses the terminology that one should not, so to speak, well, this is my paraphrasing, but waste his time on trying to become a tzaddik. It's beyond your, right, to becoming a saint or a very righteous person, a perfect person. It's beyond the realm of your possibility. In this vein, in this understanding, tzaddik is referred to as someone who never even has a desire to do something bad, right? So we're not talking about the fact somebody never does anything bad. He never even has that arousal, that desire to do anything. He doesn't have any inclination to do something negative ever in his life. And that
how boring
stage, I know, boring, right? Well, by the way, part of what we're going to talk about today's lesson is titled, Your Struggle is Worth It. And part of what we're going to talk today is the value of the struggle. Not just to ourselves, but to God. Right? So one of the questions that we've never really answered is why? Why does the Alter Rebbe, and I think really you read the answer in a nutshell, but obviously it's not enough to just say it's boring, but that's the kernel of it, right? That there's no struggle. But why is it that we're being sort of dissuaded or discouraged from trying to pursue the life of a tzaddik? And the Alter Rebbe instead chooses to focus. The entire book is called, right? This is called the Tanya, but the first section, part one of the Tanya, is called the book for in-betweeners. As if like this is our goal. Let's try to be an in-betweener. Let's strive for mediocre. Right? As we've learned, a Benoni is way more than mediocre. But why? Right? So that's question number 2. Question number 3 is what is the purpose of the Benoni? In other words, and this is going to tie very much into understanding what the Benoni's struggle is on a day-to-day basis. In other words, why was the Benoni created? What was the purpose of creation of the Benoni, and how does the Benoni realize that creation? Right? Because if we're going to say that we're going to spend most of our time trying to be a Benoni, an in-betweener, an intermediate person, and not a tzaddik, not like the most saintly person that there is in the world, someone who never has desire to do bad, then what is the purpose of the Benoni? Right? What is the goal of the Benoni? And then we'll figure out how to achieve that. In other words, I guess, can we put it, meaning question 3 and 4 can sort of be interchangeable, which is, why would God take a neshama, take a soul, which is a piece of God from above, right? He throws it down here into a body with an animal soul and everything, right? So if you tell me the whole point is to subdue the animal soul, the body, to convert them, to uplift them to holiness, to make them connected to godliness, right? Which is essentially what the tzaddik does, by the way, right? The tzaddik is not born without a desire for bad. He just takes that desire for bad and completely rids himself of it. The Benoni is not like that. The Benoni will never ever completely get rid of that desire. Till the day he dies, he will struggle and struggle. Right? The struggle is real, like they say. He will struggle to overcome his Yetzer Hara. He will struggle to overcome his evil inclination. He will struggle to overcome his animal soul, his animalistic desire, every single day of his life till the day he dies. I don't get it. So what's the point? He came into this world, right, with an animal soul, leaves this world with the animal soul. The animal soul remains in its force as it is with that desire to do evil, right, and he never manages to overcome it.
But the tzaddik also has animal soul. He just doesn't pay attention to it.
No. The tzaddik, no. He doesn't have an animal soul at all. Remember, it's in the Tanya's definition of a tzaddik, he doesn't have an animal soul at all.
So
Hargei b'tainus, he says. He has killed him with fasting and with being disgusted with evil things and bad things.
One cannot aspire to one day not have the animal soul, conquer it completely.
Okay. At least that's true. That's the tzaddik.
I know. to try to be
So,
one.
so by the way, and we did discuss that there are moments when we can be like a tzaddik, 100%.
Yeah.
But for us to strive to be as human beings, to be tzaddikim, the Alter Rebbe discourages us from it. And it's a good question. Why? You have a very challenging question. Why? Why would he do that? You think never, ever in your life you could be like that? And you'd be very optimistic, which is a good thing. And I hope that at the end of this chapter you'll realize what's so powerful about the Beinoni. The Alter Rebbe is telling us, let's focus on that. That's a very important pursuit. That's a very important business to be occupied with. Okay?
It's probably more important than
Being a Beinoni.
being a tzaddik.
In certain ways, yes, I would give you that.
Because tzaddik is not starting. He finished.
So that's the point we're going to discuss today. Okay? So essentially what we're asking is why struggle if we will never win, right? Why would we spend so much time in our lives struggling against our animal soul, knowing full well that there's no way we will ever completely vanquish it, right? In other words, you may win one battle and another battle and another battle, which is very nice, but essentially what this, I guess the cynic who would ask such a question is, what we're asking is, what is it all worth it? So you won this time. So you won this time. You walked by whatever low part of town, and you had there's a strong urge to do something terrible, and you overcame it, and you walked by. Great, you're a Beinoni, right? Well, at least in that moment, in that action, right? What was it worth it? You didn't kill the desire. You still have that in you. In other words, and this is why it's going to tie so much into action in this chapter. In other words, if we've spent the first 34 chapters kind of talking about our emotions, talking so strongly about our emotions, talking about how the whole point is to become a better person and better your character and be a better spouse and be a better friend and be a better everything, right? So what does it help if I win this little battle? If I know that ultimately I'm never going to win the whole, right? If I win this little war, but I won't win the whole battle, right? And so here we begin to quote the Zohar. So we're in section 2. We'll do a little reading. The Alter Rebbe what was that? The Alter Rebbe on page 388. On page 388, towards the bottom where there's that little break, he says, "V'hu b'haktim eloshin hayinuka b'Zohar Parshat Balak." So the Zohar is a Kabbalistic book, according to most attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, although we don't know for certain who the author is. Probably the foremost work on Kabbalah, in other words, Jewish mysticism, the most mystical of the Jewish works. And in the Zohar, on Parashat Balak, right, so it's split according to the Parshiot of the Torah and the books of the scriptures. And on the Parasha of Balak, right, the Torah portion of Balak, the Zohar says as follows. It says in Balak, I apologize, it says in Ecclesiastes, in Kohelet, Hachacham einav berosho, that a wise man has eyes in his head. Now, right away, all the sages jump on this and they're like, hello, where else would a person's eyes be? Right? A wise man has eyes in his head. Where does a dumb man have his eyes? Somewhere else? Right? And the classic answer to that, just because I feel like I need to write that, we're always taught that in mikra yotzeh midei pshuto, that I apologize. Baron, can I ask you to help me out? Let's get 2 cheers from in the main room. Thank you. We'll pause for just one moment. Hey Lynn, how are you? Hi Jeff. No worries. I didn't expect such a big crowd, and not everybody answered. So we'll bring some more chairs. We'll get everybody settled. Thank you. Perfect.
You see what we are.
Lynn, how have you been?
Good.
Good. Thank God. That's good.
In the after dinner.
And how'd it go?
Yeah.
How did it go? Well.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, perfect. All right, I think we're out of books, but let's get them a handout. Here's one, here's 2. That's one for you, right?
You know, why don't you take this book and I'll share.
Oh, that's a good idea. And then you can share with Baron. Perfect. So let's pass that one down for Jeff and Lynn to share.
Thank you.
So perfect time. We were just about to read inside the book on page 388. So for Jeff and Lynn, so just to catch you guys up a little bit, today's topic, the main topic of today, as is the name of this new course, which is only 3 weeks, is the power of action. And that's what we're going to talk about, because the Tanya has focused quite a bit over the past 34 chapters talking about our emotions, right? How to be a better person. And today, one of the main things we want to talk about is action. And what is the power of a mitzvah? What is the power of action over feeling something? In other words, over becoming a better person. Right? Because if you think about it, it's all about our emotions, right? If I could just control my anger, if I could just control never to be depressed, if I could just control, right? So what is this unique power there is in action, right? We discussed already the uniqueness of our emotions and the task that we have at hand. We walked out with a lot of homework. The Alter Rebbe left us with a lot of homework to work on our emotions, right? Our positive emotions, our negative emotions, right? How to love a fellow Jew properly, how to make sure we don't get depressed, or that if we do, it's controlled depression, that we know what it's going to lead to, etc. And in an attempt to give us the value and the powerful oomph, I just don't have a better word, of action, like I guess how close to God action particularly can get us, and what's so important about action. So the Alter Rebbe has opened up with introducing the fact that we have a struggle. What is this concept that we have a struggle, as Tanya has in the past, discouraged us from trying to be a tzaddik, from trying to be perfect, right? Why would we strive to be at a level where we're constantly going to struggle and we know we're never going to overcome that struggle, right? Because the Beinoni, the intermediate person, the in-betweener, never overcomes his animal soul. He never gets rid of his animal soul. It's always there. There's always a struggle. So why would we be encouraged to try to pursue that? Why would we even struggle? What's the point? Right? Why is that struggle so valuable? And to this is going to come the point of what's so powerful about the action that we do when we overcome a struggle, even one time, even if we don't win the battle. And so the Alter Rebbe is opening, so we're on page, well, not opening, but continuing, on page 388, we were about to read the Zohar. And the Zohar quotes a verse from Ecclesiastes, from Kohelet, which says, Hechacham einav berosho. So we're at the bottom, couple lines on the bottom there. Which means a wise man has eyes in his head. And right before you had walked in, we've been mentioning that all of the sages jump up on this right away. What does that even mean? Where should a man's eyes be if not in his head? Where are a dumb man's eyes? Not in his head? Of course, everyone's eyes are in their head. So what does it mean that a wise man has eyes in his head? Okay, so the classic interpretation, and we're always taught that in Mikra Yotzeh Midei Pshuto, that every verse, even if it has its extrapolations and its figurative, explanations and lessons for our lives, but it also has a very literal translation. So the literal translation here is a wise man has eyes inside his head. In other words, in his head, he looks into the future. This was a verse that was quoted to me as a child an unbelievable amount of times. Whenever you do something as a child and you don't realize, if you do this, like if you go play football now, then you probably will get a 60 on your test tomorrow because you haven't studied. That's how it works, right? So my father would always look at me and say, Zushi, chacham einav berosho, right? A wise man, his eyes are in his head. In your head, you have eyes that you look far into the future and you plan ahead, right? Essentially, it's like we say in English, planning ahead.
Connected to reason.
What?
Connected to reason.
In a reasoning way, not in a physical seeing way, but a more... Okay, so that's the literal translation. But here the Zohar is taking this a step further. What does it mean that a man has eyes in his head? So we're in the second to last paragraph on page 388. The Zohar asks, in what other place should a man's eyes be? Might they be in his body or in his arm? Such that Shlomo, right, because Kohelet is written by Solomon, King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest of all men who wrote this verse is letting us know otherwise? Brilliant. A wise man has eyes on his head? So rather, the Zohar answers, the verse definitely has the following implication. We have learned that a person should not walk 4 cubits with his head uncovered. This is a famous verse in the Talmud. It's usually referring to the kippah. That a person should not walk more than 4 cubits without wearing a kippah on his head. To be fair, this is actually not even a mitzvah. It's not even a commandment. It's not one of the 613 mitzvahs. It's not obligatory that a person not walk 4 cubits. But the Talmud encourages us that if we want to be God-fearing, we should never walk more than 4 cubits without a kippah on our heads. Okay, interesting. My time asks the Zohar, what is the reason? I'm on page 389. Because the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests on his head. And the eyes and words of every wise man are on his head. Meaning to say, he is focused on that which rests and remains on his head, i.e. upon the Shekhinah. In English, we would say on what is above us. Right? We always talk about, right in what do they call it? The big blue book, right? That from AA meetings. The 12 steps. What's it called? The big blue book. They call it, or the Bible. They call it whatever. Right?
It's called the Big Book.
The big book. So they don't want to refer to God, right? Because they want to remain sort of ambiguous from religions. They always call it a higher power, right? This is your higher power. Whatever your higher power is, you have to have some sort of higher power. I always found that fascinating because it's directly connected. In Judaism, we talk about this all the time. Yes, we have a more defined version of God, maybe than just the words higher power, but essentially, that is the point of the kippah. The kippah, why do we wear a kippah on our heads? Because we don't want to walk around thinking, I am on the top of the world. The kippah reminds us there's always something that's above you. There's a higher power. There's something that's above you. And so wearing a kippah reminds us that it's not just my kippah that's above me. It's not just a piece of cloth that happens to be on top of my head, but there's a higher power that's higher than me. So says the Zohar, V'kad taman, and when his eyes are there, again, his mental eyes, right? And he's conscious of the Shekhinah's presence, he will be aware that the flame lit above his head is in need of oil. Since a person's body is a wick with a flame lit above it. And King Shlomo shouts out to us, don't allow oil to be lacking from your head. That's another verse in Ecclesiastes. Because the flame on his head needs oil. And the oil refers to good deeds done by the person. And it was concerning this concept that the verse says a wise man has eyes in his head. This is the end of the citation from the Zohar. If any of you can make heads or tails of that, I encourage you to now. But for this, we turn to the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe unpacks the Zohar. He says like this. He says, this Zohar is based on a famous Talmudic saying. Well, not Talmudic saying. It's like a long Medrash and Talmud. They talk about it at length. Was anybody here at the musicians and music that we did around the fire when we spoke about the soul? Mm-hmm. You were there when we spoke about the soul?
Yeah.
And what happens during the 9 months of conception, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
Many of you will be familiar with this, but at that one we went through it at length. The Talmud describes at length that first of all, the Talmud starts from when a man and woman are intimate with each other, God sends the angel in charge of the souls to go get a soul. And he tells the angel, there's a child that's about to be conceived, and the physical action is being done, and we need to make sure that there's a soul that's going to imbue this body. And so he goes and he gets a soul, and there's a whole discussion there about how he takes that. It was a different class, I can't repeat the whole class here. But he takes the soul on a tour of the world, and the soul doesn't want to come down here into this physical world, doesn't want to be in a body. It wants to just be, up in heaven where things are safe and pure and whatever, right? And light, and he's basking in the glory of God. And instead it's shoved down here literally into a putrid drop, and then it becomes a human being, and the human being wants all sorts of other things, and this piece of godliness doesn't want to be there, right? So as part of this, retelling of what's going on behind the scenes during conception and birth and all that, labor and birth, so the Talmud tells us that during the 9 months when a baby is inside the womb, there's an angel that's guarding it. There's lots of things. The angel is teaching a Torah. V'ner daluk al rosho, and there is a light, a flame that is lit above its head. Interesting. I have never ventured to open up a pregnant woman, but I can pretty much assure you that if we did, I've never done a C-section before, but I can pretty much assure you that there's no flames in there. So what is this Talmud referring to? So this Talmud is referring to a famous analogy for the soul, which is based on many verses in the Torah that allude to this. One of the famous ones is Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. That the candle of God, or the flame of God, is the candle of man. In other words, that the neshama of a person, the presence of Hashem inside a person is like a flame. And normally that's about as far as it goes. I think many times when we've talked about this here in this class, we've brought the main analogy, the main analogous trait, right, which was that just as a flame strives always to go higher, right? If you ever pay attention to a flame, it's connected to a wick, but no matter which way you turn the match or the candle or the wick, the flame always wants to go up. And yet, should the flame ever be successful in detaching itself from the wick and going up, it would cease to exist. Similarly, our soul is the same way. Our soul is a piece of God. It's always yearning to go out of our body and be connected to God, to have this out-of-body experience. But if it should ever be so successful, right? The person would die, would pass on, because the soul is also his source of life. But here the Alter Rebbe dissects this analogy all the way. Because the Zohar has so many points that it brings out. So the Alter Rebbe explains that it's not so simple. There's a candle, there's a wick, there's oil, there's a flame. So the Alter Rebbe says the flame here, of course, it's the neshama, but it's referring to the presence of Hashem, the Shekhinah, right? And in order for a flame to be attached to a wick, because the wick, as it is too coarse, is no, I guess, power to hold the flame, and it needs that oil to keep feeding it through the wick and into the flame. And the moment that there's not enough oil, the flame will go out. Similarly, in our lives, says the Alter Rebbe, the flame is referring to the presence of God, and the wick is our body. The wick is our lives, is us. If we want to be here in this physical world, if we want to be connected to God, if we want that God should rest his presence upon us, that we should have some sort of godly influence in our lives, then we must have oil. And the oil tells us the Zohar is good deeds, is an action. When we have the choice to do something good or, heaven forbid, the opposite, and we choose to do something positive, boom, we fed the wick. And now the presence of Hashem can rest within our simple and coarse life. Right? Because the wick, the body as it is in and of itself, is not such a great a creation. It doesn't, right? The body as it is in and of itself doesn't necessarily always go and do the right thing. We can do many terrible things with our bodies. And yet, if we choose to permeate our lives and permeate our bodies with good deeds, right? Feed the wick with oil, then the flame comes and rests itself upon the body. Right? Then the presence of Hashem rests within the body. Powerful Zohar. Okay? We need actions. Right? We need to do mitzvahs. If we don't do mitzvahs, if we don't occupy ourselves with connecting to Hashem, with following the Torah and the mitzvah, how are we ever going to have the presence of Hashem? How are we ever going to connect to God? Right? I don't get it. Says the Alter Rebbe, a klutz kasha, a very simple question, a very, like a knock on wood question. Isn't the soul a piece of God?
Yes.
So then why would the soul need to do mitzvot in order to connect to God? Why would we, our body and our soul, need to do a mitzvah in order to connect to God? Aren't I connected to God by the very fact that I have a piece of God within me? Can't I never be disconnected from God? So what is a mitzvah all about? What is the point of the physical putting on tefillin, of the physical putting the coin into tzedakah, or whatever it is that the physical action is that you're doing a mitzvah? What is that doing? What is so powerful about it? And now, my friends, we have arrived at the crux of the lesson. This is what the Alter Rebbe has wanted to teach us all along. The power of a mitzvah. What is so powerful about a mitzvah, you ask? In order to understand that, we need to understand who we are. And why it's so hard for us to fuse with the divine. You see, when we work on our emotions, and we do, right, all the time, we pray and we meditate, we figure out how to be better people, and we connect to God in an amazing way. Let's say we are able to reach some sort of idyllic state, like a heavenly state, and literally the only thing I want is I love God, and I have this awe for God, right, and a reverence for God. All the emotions we spoke about until now, right? I'm joyous, so it's a great place for God to be, for godliness to hang out, right? And I want to connect to godliness. There is one last barrier that remains. You know what it is? Me. The Talmud tells us this over and over and over again. Ein ani v'hu yichodin ladur sham. Says the Talmud says, by a human being, the way it works is that kli rekan machzik, kli mali'ena machzik. Even in a physical human being, if you want to take a cup or a vessel, anything, whatever it is, and put something inside of it, you can only do that if there's space, if it's empty. You cannot fill a cup that's full of water with water. It's impossible, no matter what you do. And God tells us this over and over again, if you are full of yourself, then I cannot be there. If there's you there, if your ego is too busy blocking the way, there's no space for me. I cannot come and rest within your life. And if there's one commandment that we are told to do, that all the other commandments rest within, is to have godly presence within us. Right? just a couple weeks from now, and just 2 weeks from now. This week is Bo, B'Shalach Yisum Shpatim. No, like 4 weeks from now. We're going to read the Asuli Mikdash V'Shachamti B'Socham, the verse that says, where God commands us to make a tabernacle, to create a holy temple, and God says, you should make a tabernacle and I will dwell within them. And everybody right away asks, what's them? Them plural, right? You've heard this question before, right? Them plural, what does that mean? It should have said, I will dwell within it. I will dwell within the holy temple or structure that you're going to create for me. And so this explains that this means that God wants to rest within every single one of us. Each and every one of us has, in our own hearts and in our own lives, in our soul, we have a little space, which we should be creating a space for God to live within us, for us to connect with the divine. But the first thing to do is to get ourselves out of the way. You see, in 34 chapters of Tanya, I know we spoke about the ego a little bit, but you could have been so busy perfecting yourself, becoming better at who you are. I love God and I fear God. Anybody notice the one word that repeated within those two sentences? I. It's I love God and I fear God. Right? There's a me here. I'm the one who does this. And how do we get out of that? We get out of that with an action. We get out of that with an action. You see, when we love, when we fear, there's a lot of us invested in it. When we feel awe, when we feel, there's a lot of us invested in it. When we fulfill an action, not just any action, right? I can stand on my head and spit wooden nickels. That doesn't make me become, nullified or less or submissive or less of an I. You want to become less of an I? I want to drink water. Instead, I choose not to. Right now, my ego wants to be doing A. Instead, I do B. And that's the most powerful way we can connect to God. You see, God created the world in a way, and of course, God's desire is reflected in the world, right? Because He wanted to create the world. We read about the fact that God created the world with speech, right? God spoke, and the world came to be.
With the 22 letters.
God desired that the world should come into existence, and it did so, right? So the world is essentially a manifestation of God's desire in this world. Right? The world, the physical world that we see around us. But that, my friends, is very superficial. And that's why, which of the three functions is it connected to? Speech. Why? Because speech is God revealing His desire to us, but on a superficial level. And that's why God spoke and the world came to be. If we want to connect to God's inner desire, a mitzvah does that for us. It says that Hashem took His desire and He enclosed it within a mitzvah. Yes, we think that we take a physical lulav and a physical etrog, we take a physical matzah and we eat it, right, or whatever physical thing it is, and that connects us. That's not what's connecting us to God. It's not the physical matzah. Of course, it's through eating the physical matzah. But it's the godly energy that's invested in it. It's God's desire. It's the fact that God wants us to eat that matzah. Which on a Kabbalistic level, on a spiritual level, might have many other significances that our bodies may not even be in tune with. God says, I don't care. I don't care. I need one thing. You don't like the taste of matzah? You're eating it anyways for me? Wow. That does it for me. Think about a relationship that we have with a spouse. Right? It's nice when somebody pours a cup of water and says, okay, I'll pour you a cup of water too, right? That's nice. But essentially, you wanted a cup of water, you're pouring it for me, whatever, right? Anybody ever have an experience where their spouse comes home with a gift and it's clear that this gift was not with me in mind, but with you in mind? You would like such a gift. I don't want it. You would want it. It's very nice of you to give me something you would want. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of affection there. It's very cute. It's adorable, right? But it's not true love, right? True love is when you say this, I don't get it, right? Think of men and women, right? The man says, to be honest, I have no clue what you see in a little ring that's got a lot of nice stones in it that are worth weight. I don't get it. I don't get it. Give me a piece of technology. Give me a nice car. Give me a nice horse. Whatever. What are the guys into? Right? Mm-hmm. What are you going to do with this little ring? Are you going to show it to somebody else? You're going to say it's worth $3,000, right? $5,000, $1 million. What does it do for you? It's a little stupid thing, right? And the guy doesn't understand it, and yet he does it because he knows that his wife wants it. Doesn't make a difference. His wife could want it for the most superficial reason in the world. It's something that she wants. And what we want is where we express ourselves, right? Our essence of who we are is expressed and is intimately connected with our desires. It could be the stupidest thing in the world. If your spouse does want you to jump on your head and spit one of the nickels, and you do that for them, then that's where it becomes connected. It doesn't make a difference what the action is, right? Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. Let me ask you a question. Is there some sort of guide, like a how-to on how to be a good spouse? Never. Why? Because it depends on the other person. You can't say, you want to be a good spouse, wake up every morning, make your spouse breakfast for bed, and make sure that they don't have to work. No, your spouse might be the type of person who loves to work and hates being in bed and doesn't even like breakfast, starts to eat at lunch. You do all that for them, the relationship is over in 1, 2, 3. Right? Why? Because a relationship, and most importantly, a relationship in which you're trying to fuse with the other being, in our instance with God, is accomplished most when you get yourself out of the way. And instead, you choose to focus on the other. And so focusing is a nice thing. If you can get your emotions out of the other, it's a nice thing. But when you take your actions, you have a choice now to fulfill your desire. Me, I love, I fear, I feel, I want. Instead, you say, God wants. Let me fill that space, which is usually filled with my desires, and I'm going to fulfill God's desire. That would be powerful between two human beings. But with God, it's infinitely more powerful. Why? Because we have the famous statement of the Rambam, that by God, it's not that there's God and His knowledge, God and His will, God and His speech. It's all the same thing. God's will is God. It's not like God has a physical body and a physical space, and this is where God is. And then God's desire is this. It is the same thing. God is that spirit of desire. When we put on tefillin, we're connecting with God because we're fulfilling the desire, which the desire is God. So when we put on tefillin, we're actually fusing with the divine. When we make a bracha on a piece of food, when we help someone in need, right? When we invite guests over to our house, these are 613 mitzvahs. What are they? There's 613 actions. 613 ways to get yourself out of the way and make God a priority. 613 ways to fuse with the divine. We're at the end of number 3. In the moment of the mitzvah, a human being fuses his physical action to become one with godliness. And he includes his body and his animal soul in it. Right? Because if he gets involved in that action entirely, if you actually fully get involved in it, then you do it with your mind, with your heart, with your, right? If everything is pushing that action. Now, how can the Shekhinah rest on Klippa? So it's a technical question. The Alter Rebbe gets it out of the way. How can the Shekhinah rest on Klippa? Klippa is the forces of evil. Says the Alter Rebbe that this causes an extreme pleasure for God. Subduing. You see, because God created evil, right? As weird as that seems. But He created it in a way that it should specifically create a challenge for us. That it should be there and it should cause us to struggle through the action. I want to do that action. I want to, but there's forces that are within me that are pushing me to do the opposite. There are forces in the world that oppose the will of God. When we subdue that, the Alter Rebbe teaches us, then we get the animal soul to go sort of into this sleeping mode. And when it does so, it seems like there's no point, but it starts on a surrounding level, like on a more superficial level, surrounding it and above it, it begins to trickle in, it begins to affect, a glimmer is the word he uses here in this book, it begins to affect the animal soul slowly. And in that moment of the mitzvah, the animal soul, the godly soul, the body, everything, like you were talking about, right? You were saying, I can't believe it. There's got to be certain moments when you do a mitzvah. When a person performs a mitzvah, when they get themselves out of the way and they focus completely on this moment that God wants us to do, everything about them is now enveloped in God. There's no I left, ideally. And everything is a vessel for godliness, so to speak. That's when we actually make ourselves a place where the presence of Hashem can rest. One more technical question, with this we'll end off. The Alter Rebbe says The Alter Rebbe's question, he says, I don't understand. Isn't this complete heresy? Aren't we saying that God changes? One of the most famous verses in the Torah is, Ani Hashem, Ani Havaya lo shaniti. I am God and I never change. Right? So here you're telling me that God doesn't shine, right? God is not revealed, and then if we do a mitzvah, then God is revealed. How does that work? Right? Obviously, it's not a question of chassidus, but this is a question of just how godliness works, right? How does it work that before I do a mitzvah, it's not, and then afterwards it does? How does that work? The Alter Rebbe references the famous Talmud. There's a famous Talmud between, it's not so famous, but there's a Talmud in which Rabbi Gamliel was confronted by a min. A min is a heretic. The heretic came over to him and he said, I don't understand. It says in the Mishnah that when 10 Jews sit around together, right, whatever they're doing, the presence of Hashem is resting. He says, and when one person is there, the presence of Hashem doesn't rest, so the Mishnah continues. When 5 people, they're doing something, whatever, the presence of Hashem rests. When 2 people, when 1 person, there's different ways that the Shekhinah, that the presence of Hashem rests among people. And the heretic asked him, I don't get it. So you guys have like 6 gods? What are you different than the idol worshippers? So he said, you fool. He said, just as the sun can shine, and there's only one sun, everybody admits it, right? And yet there are some rays that enter here into this room on 1090 East Walnut Street, right? And there are some rays that enter my home and some rays that enter your home to feed the plant garden, the tower garden. And there are some different rays that go into every single home, right? And so each person will say, "Oh, this morning the sun by me was shining. Is it shining by you? You got some rays also?" And the sun gave. So somebody's going to say, "You know what? Today the sun was different than yesterday. The sun today was shining in my house. It wasn't shining." So no, silly. It's all about the recipient. Right? Where are you? The sun is shining. The sun is shining. The sun is shining everywhere. Right? Are you in a place where there's nothing blocking you? Right? Or do you have a window? Are you in a position where the clouds aren't blocking? It's all about everything else. The sun is shining. It's the way the world interacts with the sun. Whether we do receive the rays, whether we don't receive the rays, they go here and there at the same time. It's 2 different rays. This one could be shining in one way, this could be shining in a different way. But the sun is shining. Similarly with God's presence. God's revelations shine out to the world. The question is, how much do we choose to tap into it? How many mitzvahs do we do? How many times do we say, I'm going to do a mitzvah now? Not a meditation, not a prayer. Praying is a mitzvah. But not, I'm going to take a moment to not push everything else out of the way and make this space for God. And make my life a presence for Hashem. It's not easy, but your struggle is worth it. With this we conclude chapter 35 of Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya. Your struggle is worth it. Thank you all for joining us.
All right.
There we go. All right. If anyone didn't pay yet for this course, it's $29.